What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Dream Chasers Ground Zero. Today we have with us Lou O'Connor. Lou, would you just mind sharing a story with us of what we like to call your personal ground zero moment and some of the things that you learned from it to help you get to where you are today?
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, a pleasure to be here with you. It's obviously it's a very good question, and life is a long journey with lots and lots of lessons. Um, but I think my ground zero moment, and I would say it's moments. It's a constant sort of a thing that keeps happening, which is I was born in Dublin during I was born in 1965, so I grew up in Ireland in the 70s and the 80s, and at that time it was basically still, we had sectarian sort of war. We had the north of Ireland, which is still sort of segregated from the Republic at this time. So we had what was perceived as sort of Catholic, Protestant, or religious sort of a conflict, but it wasn't. It was more about identity. But I remember, and this ground zero moment didn't. It's like it's like the break. It's like an egg breaking. When the shell breaks, it's the breaking of the shell of understanding, if that sort of makes sense. And I think, I'm talking about growing up in Ireland, but I think this applies to all cultures and society, because I've since lived in Germany and I've lived in Latin America, and I talk a lot to people about it because I think everyone has a similar experience, except the time when the breaking of the shell of understanding happens is different for everybody else. And what it is, I think we're all born into a certain order, a certain culture, that is normal. If you grew up in Palestine or in Belfast or in Detroit or in Tokyo, that life you're born into and the environment and your parents and the education is your normal. And it's interesting because what I remember at a very young age, looking at what was going on in front of me, and I knew there was something, either, I don't know if wrong is the right word, but I knew there was something, I suppose wrong. Yeah, there was something wrong about this because, for example, I was in the Republic of Ireland, and I came from a nationalist community which had been very pro United Ireland. That would have been where the IRA and stuff would have sort of evolved out of. Yet 50 miles away, we had a community in the north of Ireland who had been sort of planted there by the British Crown, 500 years before, and they felt they were British. And we felt we were Irish. And I knew there was something wrong, that we were both on the same island. And there was this sort of border between us where on one side people would say, this is the United Kingdom, and we would say, no, it's not, it's the Republic of Ireland. So I knew there was something wrong with that, and also my community didn't necessarily recognize the government that ran our country, and they didn't recognize the government that ran Northern Ireland either. So I knew that governments and borders, I got a sense, were transitory, were negotiable, and we're down to, like, geographically where you were coming from. So it was only when I traveled and I went to live in Germany, and when I lived in Germany at the beginning, I lived close to the French border, and I realized that the area I was living over the last 100 years had, at many different times, depending on what war and who won, it was France, then it was Germany, then it was France again, with World War I, World War II. And that's when I had that sort of moment of realizing that you have to sort of, you have to look deeper, I think, at everything that's presented to you. Because on the surface, of things, it's not real. It's just, it's an agreed upon fiction, it's a shared imagination. And I'd realized that growing up where I was, not that there was anything wrong with it, because everybody, I think, experiences the same thing, but the map that I was given was constantly being updated and outdated, and it wasn't necessarily a direct route to anything, to happiness. The Irish culture, is great, and we would have thought, oh, we're great drinkers, and we have a great sense of humor, and this is the best country in the world. And but then you go to another country and they feel exactly the same about theirs. So the big lesson there was that um, everybody, we tend, I'll give you, and I heard an interesting definition of patriotism, right? I know in North America, and you won't mind me saying, but the North Americans are very, very patriotic, right? Not, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but a sort of a humorous definition of patriotism is, this is the best country in the world because I was born here. You know what I mean? And I mean that like in a funny way, but it's shining a light on the possibility to examine what we're being told, what's real and what's not real. Particularly now because I mean, right now in Europe again, we've got 100,000 Russian troops along the Ukrainian border. If they invade, and that may well be Russia again in a week. So who's deciding that? You know what I mean? So that's really it. I think we're born into a certain order, and then we have a sort of what I call disorder, is when we wake up to the fact that not all that I'm being told is necessarily true. And then we have what I call reorder. And reorder is when we make our own decision and plan on how, we make our own quest, if you will, and to become more awakened to the truth, really, And once you go, and that disorder, when you wake up to it, as I'm sure we all have, that can be an uncomfortable time. Some people call it a spiritual awakening. It's when you wake up to, things are not necessarily as they appear to be. And at least I know that now. And from here on in, I'm going to properly investigate, everything that's presented to me. And I mean that on a spiritual level and on business and stuff like that. So anyway, I hope that was probably a bit of a long-winded answer, but if you haven't had an Irish guest before, Aaron, you'll realize it's very hard to get a short answer out of an Irish person.
Well, noted. You actually are my first Irish guest, so thank you. But no, I think it was good, and I think that the messages you had in there was really important. Where I think I want to start a little bit prior to the disorder phase, as you had called it, where you originally get woken up. I think I want to go like just before that, to where you were kind of in a state of flux, where there was kind of a lot of argument going on about who exactly was who, where you're saying you didn't know if you were necessarily Irish or if you were British, or like all of those things going on, or like and that was all kind of left up to perception to a lot of people at that time. And that's where I kind of want to zone in here for a second, like in a time of uncertainty where you are in the country that you were born in, and you think you're one way or one thing, and then there's other people claiming that you're not. Like what exactly is going through your head at that time, where in a sense, like you don't even exactly know who you are. Like you don't
Correct.
necessarily know if you're Irish, if you're British, anything like that. So I just kind of wanted to get your take on, how you were able to kind of wrap your head around that moment where,
Yeah.
of uncertainty.
Yeah. Excellent. No, it's an excellent question. And there is an answer to it. And the answer is, you know, success is built on failure. Now, both of those words are just concepts. I don't, they can't really aptly describe what I'm trying to talk about. But in this journey of life, we learn the truth in many ways from through experience and through what we call maybe failure. Although it's not the right word for it. If you learn from something, how can it be considered a failure? But for example, let's say most of us grow up in most anybody maybe listening, and we grow up in a sort of a Western, if you will, democracy, and a capitalist society as well, and consumerism, and we'd learn that if you want to be happy, you need to achieve certain things. Let's say financial, education, to get to be successful. And I think it's only when you get there, and whatever it is, if you decide you want to be an academic and you find yourself then you're a professor of Harvard, what you'll probably find is that's not it. That doesn't guarantee or give you that happiness maybe you thought. Or if you decided I'm going to be a millionaire, and plenty of millionaires will tell you the same thing, even billionaires, as soon as they've become a billionaire, that's still not it. It's that, you could call, some people call it the God-shaped hole. We all have a sort of a yearning for something, completeness, peace of mind, a sense of ease and comfort within the world. And at the beginning, our society, then our culture tends to point us in a certain direction and say, well, once you get here, you'll have that. And the aha moment that you talked about, Aaron, was when I became successful in that sense. I bought some property. I was 23 years of age. I was driving a Porsche in Germany. I bought some property in Ireland and Europe, and it wasn't what I thought it would be. And it was a hard lesson because um, I would say during that time, I was running on ego, and I'm glad I'm not that person anymore, because I was, to politely say, I was a pain in the bun. I was ambitious and wanted money and driven, and I thought, everybody should be the same. So I sort of went down the wrong path, but I learned from that lesson. And the big sort of aha moment it was for me that and I only learned this when I started to look a bit deeper, which is, there's only one thing important to focus on in order for everything to be right. And that one thing is, I have to decide, and I had to decide actually, who do I want to be? What type of person do I want to be? Just being rich is not really a person, or it's a material thing. Who do I want to be? Like, what principles are important to me, like honesty, integrity, humility, self-awareness, service, perseverance, faith, hope. What type of principles do I have to practice to become the person I want to be? And what I learned was, and the great thing is, when you learn this lesson, is there is no equal and there is no better. Once you get onto this path, if you will, it delivers. And what it is you need to get those spiritual principles right first, and everything else will follow. So if you go out, say, in your daily life and try to be the person you want to be, you don't have to worry about the money. You don't have to worry about the girlfriend or the wife or acceptance within your community. All of that will fall into place if you're on that path. And that doesn't matter where you live or who you are, because these are sort of universal principles, of service. For example, if you want to make a point at least every day, you want to try and help somebody, or it's on your radar to have a service sort of commitment in your life, which I do. I have numerous ones, which I can tell you more about in a minute if you like. But once you get on that path, and it's great, because it relieves you all the worry about how, will I get there, and how am I going to get there? Because all of that will happen. Now, it's not going to happen necessarily overnight and exactly when I want it or you want it, but it is, to me, the solution, because everything else comes into play. So I hope that helped. The short answer is, if you get the spiritual side of things right, you don't have to worry about anything else, and everything else you want, are dreaming of, will come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things, especially with kids my age now, is we were never really taught how to look internally for those type of things, where we don't know how, per se, that, we are kind of groomed to think a certain way from a very young age, that we are going to be one of, I don't know, very few positions, and we don't really know what all is out there. We don't know that we can groom ourselves to be whatever or whoever we want to be. And that's where a lot of us are uncomfortable with failure and uncomfortable with change, because it's outside the norm. It's not what we were taught. It's not what other people are doing, because you feel alone, and it doesn't bring a sense of comfortability.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's why there's so few of us now that are entrepreneurs, if you will, just that go against the grain of kind of what everybody else is doing, and kind of try to tread off on their own path and build their own
Hmm.
path, because they know who they want to be and what they want to achieve. But those are the people, like you said, that look deeper, that know exactly who they are and what they want to achieve. And that doesn't all have to come in one moment. I want to kind of point out as well that like who you are can be something that you develop over time. Like you're not just going to sit down one day on paper and decide exactly who you're going to be and what you're going to do for the rest of your life. You just don't have that level of power
Yes.
over it. But what I am saying is like
Hmm.
if you are serious about like a lot of us kind of before I go into that point is when we are in that state of disorder, like you mentioned, that, you know, we're starting to realize that maybe this is a path that I don't want to go down. This profession isn't what I thought it was. You know, this way of thinking isn't what I thought it was. Like little things like that, we get uncomfortable. But if like we have to realize that if we want to make change, if we want to be different than whatever we are right now, like you're
Hmm.
going to have to go through uncomfortable situations. And there's nothing that we can really
Exactly.
do about that. It's just natural. But it
Yeah.
is those uncomfortable situations that allow you to achieve the level of growth you need to get to that next step, to that next point, to the correct path that you do
Yes.
want to go down. And I think
Yeah.
that there's too many of us now that try to dodge that process, that we don't
Hmm.
want to go through those levels of change because we don't want to feel uncomfortable. We don't want to feel vulnerable. But
Yeah.
that in itself is the growth. Like that is you growing, you feeling
It is.
uncomfortable, you feeling upset. That is you shedding the weight of, that
Exactly.
previous thing
Yeah.
and building new. Like
Yeah.
that is essentially what it is in itself. And like the process like that is you growing. Like you like in that time and moment, like a lot of
Exactly.
people will say like, you grow over time but you don't really notice it in the moment, but like in that moment you are doing it, you are feeling it like right
Yeah.
then and there, accurate, like actively. And those trials, those challenges, that pain moment, the pain of those moments, like they're there, that's there for a reason, that is grooming you to become that person that you want to become.
Yeah.
And like that's what I like what I'm trying to say is that I feel like a lot of us don't understand that concept, that pain is there for us
Hmm.
to grow into that person.
Yeah.
And it tests you to
Yeah.
see how bad that you want it, to
Yeah.
see how
Yeah.
bad that you truly want to, like if you truly want to become that person, or that whatever that thing is for you, or if that's just an idea that you kind of that was manifested by somebody else and now you're trying to achieve somebody else's vision.
Yeah.
And it depends how deep that passion runs for you. And that's why I think
Correct.
the point that you made about looking deeper is so important, because it has to come from inside you. You
Yes.
can't, like I can't say that, I was on Instagram yesterday and saw what Jimmy's doing and that sounds really cool and now I'm just going to do that too. Well, like yeah, I might be able to start down that path, but unless it comes from somewhere inside me, that's something
Correct.
that I actually want to achieve and actually want to become for myself, I'm not going to get there because you're
Exactly.
not truly passionate about that.
Exactly. No, you nailed it there, and that's exactly. I mean, pain, if you will, or suffering is an instruction, and it's only when we get out of our comfort zone, and when we're out of our comfort zone, we're uncomfortable. That's where the magic happens. That's where it happens, and I also try to look at the universal pattern in things like, for example, there's no security in nature. You talk about shedding a skin. I mean, you'll see that with snakes and with snails and caterpillars and stuff. And there's always some pain involved, and some leaving, something, shedding of skin, as you put it. There's always some pain and some shedding and some loss involved in growth. And as you said, it's only when you're tested will you find out, is this really what I want? I mean, what am I willing to suffer for this, and is it worth sort of suffering for? And I think you made a very good point at the beginning as well of what you're saying about, and it's also true for other generations as well, which is, there's no, like, for example, the Dalai Lama said if children all over the world were doing meditation by the time they're 8 or 10 years of age, he said we'd never have any world wars. I believe him when he says that. So the school system we're in North America and in Europe and many parts of the world was created back during the Industrial Revolution to create workers for the state. That was it. Not to educate us about life, to make us good workers. And that hasn't changed. So we're not learning anything in school that's going to help us um, in the spiritual realm or in the philosophical realm and even the emotional realm. And that's what we should be learning, because that's what I think, where you said people come out of school or even college, and I think you have to sort of, I'll use the word fit, like in terms of, going to the gym. You have to be physically fit, spiritually fit, emotionally fit, and mentally fit. And one thing that's largely missing is spiritually fit. And that could be just, you could present, it could start with, parents and educators starting with presenting all the different sort of religions and philosophies in the world, because for the most part the religions today don't deliver on what they should. And I'm not negating them at all, because there's a lot of good stuff to be learned in the teachings, but they've sort of become a concept themselves, and a hierarchical concept and conceptualization, which, for the attendee or for, somebody who's trying to really, really learn something, it just doesn't deliver. Now, that's not to say it's not out there, but, and I think as well, what plays a big part is just life itself, is getting out there and getting your hands dirty and getting involved, and we that's where we learn too. But if you're around the right people and in the right environment, it'll come a lot easier and a lot quicker. But I agree with you 100% that the youth, if you will, of Europe and North America and the Far East, and they realize something's missing. They realize there's something they haven't been taught or learned, and trying to find out what it is. And I think it's that equilibrium of having sort of, being mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally fit. If that's, you know what I mean by that word.
Absolutely. And I actually really like that you kind of brought the term like fit into it, because I think a lot of us can kind of understand what fit is and fitness nowadays, like just kind of a general understanding. And I think that kind of breaks down the concept into something a little bit more simple
Hmm.
to kind of bounce off of, because like we're talking about shedding the skin and making room for growth, where like if you're talking about like going to the gym, working out, gaining muscle, any of those things, like when you're working out, you are breaking down your muscles. And in doing that, that is where the stretching comes in, and you make room for regrowth to then build muscle and grow. Like that is in and of itself is exactly the type of process that we're talking about, just figuratively, because that's not exactly
Yeah.
what you're doing, obviously. But I think kind of bouncing off the point that you made about our education is that, like, yes, a lot of us are starting to realize like there's things just about life that we should know, but we're never taught. And whether that is that we just get thrown into a situation and then we get slapped in the face because we don't know what we're supposed to be doing, or because, somebody brings it up and we're just, kind of like confused because we don't know about that topic. And I think that a lot of us now, like, just, I mean, we continue to kind of, I don't want to say blindly, because some of us know that we're just kind of doing what we're told, and others of us are kind of rebelling against that. But
Hmm.
like to be an entrepreneur or a business owner, or kind of to go against the grain, if you will, like you have to realize like you're kind of like putting a target on your back, because
Hmm.
like you are signing up for a life against societal norms. You
Hmm.
are, I mean, deliberately going against what every other person was taught to believe.
Yeah.
And, people aren't just going to stand by and watch you do that. Some people are going to try to like kind of, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it here. Like some people are going to try to kind of knock you off of that
Sure.
course, but
They
not
will.
out of spite. They're going to try to, change your way of thinking back to, what is normal for them, because they think that they're helping you, and they're trying to help you. And
Yeah.
that's something that I've dealt with a lot,
Yeah.
from, my peers or family or things like that, that there's just different ways of doing things, and they were taught one way, and maybe you're trying to learn another way. And those people are going to try to help you because they care about you, but they also might not understand what you're trying to achieve. So
Sure.
that's just something to be wary of as well.
Hmm.
But, you know, especially people that are going on to be an entrepreneur, they, like I said, kind of, I mentioned kind of like challenging these beliefs. We kind of have like what I like to call like a propensity of breaking rules per se,
Hmm.
where we just have a way of, when people think one way, we want to know why they think that way. And we
Yeah.
want to know why we should think that way. We challenge it a little bit more so than just kind of doing what we're told. And I actually really like that you mentioned the Dalai Lama, because I had a quote that I saw from there the other day that actually goes perfectly with this, and it goes, "Know the rules well, so you can break them effectively." And I think that it's just such a powerful point, kind of going off of the conversation that we're having right now, because like you have to know the rules, because like yes, that's what society wants you to do, and yes, obviously there's laws that you have to follow, but at the same time, like you have to understand where you do have to conform and where you don't, and where you
Yeah.
can form your own opinion on whatever topic it is at the time. I mean, and like you said, like it's about taking risks, and sometimes you're going to fail, but if you're learning from that, is it really a failure? And that's
Yeah.
another thing that I really like that you mentioned as well. I mean, it's about getting back up when you fail and put yourself out there again. And yeah, maybe you're going to break some rules on the way, but for some of us, that's kind of fun. So, that's up to you. But I
Yeah.
mean, that's what entrepreneurs do. And it really kind of just scares everybody else. That's why you kind of put, like I said, that target on your back, because a lot of people aren't going to understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And they're going to challenge your belief. They're going to do just about everything they can to kind of break that down, whether they're trying to help you or whether they're not. But things are going to get in your way. Life's going to get in your way. And like we
Yeah.
talked about earlier, that is the trials. That is the shedding of the skin. I mean, you have to completely kind of like, what's the word I want to use here? You have to like
Maybe.
dismantle like
Yeah. Exactly. And
everything
challenge.
that they've groomed you to believe. And it's not
Absolutely.
easy,
That's it. No,
like
it's not. But you're absolutely right, though. You have to. You've zoomed right in on it, which is like, most people are, there's an old, well, Pink Floyd song is called "Comfortably Numb." A lot of people are comfortably numb. They have shelter and they have food, and they have a good life, so they don't want to rock the boat, or they feel comfortable in the way things are. Whereas entrepreneurs, revolutionaries, rule breakers, they're the ones that are sort of charging ahead, saying, "No, no, let's go this way." But look, one thing we know, again, looking at the universal pattern, is we're still evolving. I mean, we've a long way to go, a long way to go, in many, many ways. You know, I used to always sort of think, because I'm happen to be born in this, 70, 80, 100 year period, that you sort of feel this is, we're so progressive and we're here, there. But 100 years ago, if you look at the speeches of politicians and stuff, you go, wow, did he say that? Only 100 years ago. And if you look at where you were 500 years ago and go back to Roman times, we're always evolving. And one thing to note is, we are, even though people might say different, it's not true. We life is getting better. I mean, there's less, like, poverty, will probably, like, abject poverty will probably be eradicated in the next 30 to 50 years. I mean, that's a fact, that's the reality. um so there's more and more people being lifting out of, what you call, abject poverty, and lack of education. We are always going in the right direction, and somebody's driving us there, or somebody's pulling us there. And it's these, most sort of, what we call geniuses, were usually considered crazy at the beginning. Always, always. If you look at in time, and that's who the rule breakers are. That's who the entrepreneurs are, to me, artists. They're very creative, and artists are not, I mean, they're just not thinking, like anybody else. They just see things differently. And you touched on something as well. There is, people don't see the world as it is. They just see it as they are. That's a concept I would suggest to anybody, to say that to yourself over and over again, and every single day, until it sort of really sort of permeates into your innermost self. Because if I'm, let's say, just, during this conversation, I've taken up, I don't know, a new sport or something, and I'm trying to sell you on it. and you've just found a new sport that you're totally nuts about, you know the way sometimes you're talking to somebody and they're not, even though what you're saying is true and you're passionate about it, you can just see they're not interested. Like, and it's simply because you're looking at it the way you see it, and they have their own, point of view. That's why it's called a point of view. Like, but we sort of forget that a lot, so it's important as well then to be careful of who you hang around with, what company you keep as well. Um, and because if somebody's not ready and doesn't have that open mind and that willingness and maybe that honesty to look at themselves, then they'll sort of pull you back. You won't make progress with those sort of people, and not to say that everybody should agree with you, but you got to sort of, I find I always look for people that have an open mind about stuff, and are willing to listen to somebody on the other side of the table who completely disagrees with them, um, to get that, that other perspective, that we don't often get, and people are, people who are like-minded like that. They love a sort of a mental duel and a bit of mental sword fencing and stuff because they learn from each other.
Yeah, and I think the point that you just made is so huge for like the young people now, is that, when we're talking about uncomfortability, we're talking about failure, like in talking about all of those things, a lot of us, um, like I know you talked about earlier, like leaving your comfort zone. We're all afraid to do that. But what we don't realize is that we are just naturally in a stage of our lives where numerous things are just coming and going all at once. And they don't always stick around for long. I mean, and that could be friends, that could be jobs, that could be anything, like
Yeah,
that life just does that. And I mean, and that's part of just being young.
yeah,
But like I said, we make friends and we lose them too. We make mistakes and we correct them too. We fall, we fail, we might hit every step on the way back down, but sometimes that's just reality. And like same thing works as in relationships. Sometimes we fall in love, sometimes we get hurt, but do we often
hmm
get back up and go try again? Yes. And we've learned from the last one. And sometimes, like one of my biggest things about failure is that failure is one of the best, teachers, simply because it makes it hard enough that you won't do it again. And like
hmm
in relationships, that's a big thing, because I'll tell you what, the guy or the girl that broke your heart and hurts you the most is probably the one you learned from the most, that you're not going to deal with your next relationship the same way ever again, because you learned from that. They made it hurt enough that you ingrained that lesson, and you're not going to do the same thing over again. But
yeah,
point
yeah,
being, no matter what we do, or no matter what situation that is, we learn, and that we learn from everything, and it makes us a stronger version of ourselves to prepare for the next endeavors ahead. And
yeah,
what I think a lot of us don't do nowadays is we're all too afraid to start the next thing. And that is where I'm kind of trying to swivel here, is that because we're too afraid to be uncomfortable, because we're too afraid to go against what everybody else believes and kind of go our own way, we don't have any confidence. But it's because we never started anything in the first place. I
hmm
mean, building self-confidence in like the simplest nutshell, I guess you could say, is just fulfilling promises that you've made to yourself. Like
hmm
if you start one day and promise yourself you're going to do, I know we've talked about fitness a couple of times, 10 push-ups, and you can do that for a week. Next week you're going to feel more confident doing 10 push-ups. I mean,
hmm
just the more consistently you can fulfill those little promises to yourself, the more easily you'll be able to make those decisions and take action on them faster, because you'll feel more confident doing so. And like I said, like I am somebody that like, I like to call those little victories, where and try
hmm
to celebrate those as much as I can, because
hmm
like I know how monumental those can be as far as compounding goes. And
hmm
like I'm thinking long game. So
hmm
I'm somebody that says these little things. Like a lot of us too, we think too macro. Like we say, I want to be rich, I want to have a big house, I want to do those things, but you have to break that down to something much less daunting, to say,
yeah,
okay, well, if I want to write a book, maybe I start by writing a page a day, or
Yeah.
a couple paragraphs, not
Yeah.
50 pages a day,
Yeah.
and trying to get it done. Like you have to kind of break that down into something that's manageable. And, like I said, reading 10 pages, doing 10 push-ups, like any of those things, like if you can make those promises to complete those tasks and follow through on those promises, your self-confidence will grow. And just like we talked about, a lot today, growth. And
Yeah.
that is what it is. Those small little victories, those small little things will compound and you'll get better. And then you'll look at the
Hmm.
next thing and you'll start to feel that traction. Like I can even give you an example right now, like this podcast right here. When I first started, like, yeah, I thought it was a great idea. I was into it, I was excited about it. But I can tell you the more I do it, the more excited I get to do it because now I feel like I have something to talk about.
Hmm.
Like before, I was like, yeah, I'm here and I get to do all these cool things with it and meet all these cool people and have some really awesome conversations. But I feel like I
Hmm.
didn't really bring a whole lot to the table. But
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
that I've tuned that skill and I continue to work with it, I feel much more confident with it. I feel that I'm on it when I'm on an interview with another professional, that I have something to add to the conversation like we've done today. Like I feel much more confident giving my point of view on some of these things. I mean, yes, from what I've learned from some of these previous interviews, but also just
Hmm.
because of repetition, because I
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
show up every day and I still do it.
Yeah.
And like I said, like my biggest point here is just keep going, just start and keep going. You will
Yeah.
get better, you will get stronger, you will get more comfortable. And then you like you mentioned, I can fully vouch for the point that you made earlier, that as soon as you start on the path, everything else will figure itself out.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so powerful because as soon as, like, all you have to do is decide to start. Like you don't even have to the first day go and smash some record or go do something massive. Like all you have to do is decide to start and start taking a couple small steps that way. And the universe is just funny that it will just pretty much hand you everything you need beyond that point, whether that's a mentor, whether that's a book recommendation, whatever that is. Like those things will
Yes.
find their way to you. So don't fret over those things. I think
Yeah.
that that's just creating undue stress and it holds you back from exactly where you need to go. Um, there's a quote I saw just the other day. I think it was by Joseph Campbell, I think.
Okay.
And it followed that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And I
Hmm.
think that, it's just another one of those like, prophetic things or whatever, but like
Yeah.
exactly where you're afraid to go is exactly where you need to go. And that is
Exactly.
essentially what I'm
Exactly.
saying, this whole time. Like if you have recognized that there's something wrong with what you're being taught, with where you're going, with the path you're on, with the friends that you have, any of those things, welcome to the club. But
Yeah.
prior to that, like there's nothing wrong with that. And
Hmm.
that's usually a sign that there's something else that you want for yourself, or there's something else meant for you.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't be afraid to pursue that. And while the crew is smaller, there are others of us out there that are doing the same thing. And if you can find those people.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be a narrow road, but look, wow, you've packed. I mean, you've a wise head or an old head on young shoulders, Aaron. I can tell you, you packed a lot in there, and you're there's some just really really key things you said. One is, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Also, um, what we're talking about, like say the spiritual life or emotional life or business life, it's not a theory. Now, in theory, we're talking about it now, right? But as you just demonstrated, you wanted to do this podcast, you're doing it. That didn't happen by just talking about it. You took certain actions to get there. And I have, a spiritual practice in my life. Um, but it is a spiritual practice. I don't just talk about it to people on podcasts. So, and you brilliantly also followed up with, which is very key, which is the universe or creative intelligence or God or whatever you want to call it. When you take a step towards it, it will take a step towards you. And all of a sudden, as you said, when you get on, when you want to go down, as soon as you start on the path opens up. But it's all down to that action that you're talking about there is, and as well, keeping it sort of in the day. I mean, we can only, I mean, you know, all of these great teachers and prophets. I mean, people sometimes think it's a bit of a cliche and here and there to quote them, but the reason, stuff the Dalai Lama has said, or Rumi said 3,000 years ago, the reason they resonate and still are being discussed and contemplated today is because they're universal truths. A universal truth is it's eternal, um, and those are the ones you sort of want in your life. But no, I mean, you covered a lot there, but it's really, really, again, everything you covered is a real stepping stone. There's no false moves there. There's nothing that'll send you backward. Taking action, you'll always get a result. Getting out of your comfort zone, all of these things are critically needed to sort of to grow, as you said as well. You're talking a lot about growth, and the formula for success, if you will, is there. But again, it's not just a theory. It's taken action, on who you want to be and where you want to go and who you want to be with. You also mentioned, and I'm not even going to get into it because it's the most complicated thing of all, is relationships. And my wife's Mexican. We're married 20 years, and we've 2 kids. But the relationships, those close, intimate relationships, are the most complicated. Um, and then because they maybe probably involve the most work, are also can be the most rewarding. But that's, for me, really dangerous territory. Is romance and intimacy, and I mean, it'll all come into our life, but it's you need the Dalai Lama in your ear for that stuff. Basically. um but I think people like is attracted to like, and I'm not being negative here either, but like, for example, people who are sort of positive and kind and compassionate, you'll find, are surrounded by positive and kind and compassionate people, because that's who's attracted to them. And likewise, people who manipulate and lie and are selfish, self-centered, sort of orientated, will be surrounded by the same people. So there's no sustainable, like, just, I hate to sound religious. I'm not being religious, but just in the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer, it says, "Give us this day our daily bread." And what they mean by that is not bread. It's give us everything we need to be at an even keel. Meaning spiritual sustenance, food, mental, everything for us to digest and to grow from. And when you're in the wrong environment, you won't get good sustenance. You'll get stuff, sort of like probably alcohol, too much alcohol and too much drugs and too much natural instincts out of whack for more of the wrong thing. Whereas if you're in a more sort of a compassionate place, then that just sort of has its own ecosystem, if you will, of emotions that are attracted in that. So yeah, and you'll see that. I mean, you see people just, you never meet somebody and you immediately feel a sense of sort of calmness or a good energy off them. You're sort of attracted to that. They sort of, in a way, they have something you want, a quality that you like. And then likewise, it can be the opposite, where you meet people and you say, "Oh, I don't want to behave like that, and I don't want to be around that." So it's great because everything is sort of nearly right in front of us. And it's easy when we sort of know, as I said at the very beginning to you, when we know the type of person we want to be, with our family and friends, then it's easy sort of to make the right decisions. But the decision we have to come to, and can be hard to come to at the beginning of in this what I call the order. There's order, then there's disorder, then there's reorder. It can be, I think everyone at some point has to sort of wake up one day and say, well, who am I? And, or who do I want to be? And usually that question comes when in suffering, and as you talked about there, like that pain and suffering it's almost a critical component of growth. And it's when we find ourselves suffering or unhappy, whatever the words you want to use for it, is when we usually make a change or be willing to make a change. And it's funny, like Rumi said as well, like there's a crack in everything, and that's where the light comes in. Or I think more, no, I know actually Leonard Cohen said that in a song, but he took it from Rumi, who was a Persian sort of poet 5,000 years ago. He said, um, there's a wound sort of in everything, but that's where the light comes in. And the point being that we all have to suffer, we all have to be wounded a little bit to allow that light come in, you know?
Yeah, and I want to jump in here real quick, just for one more point before we go ahead and wind it down here a little bit. Just that, I mean, you also just, I mean, threw out a lot of, I mean, value just in, those last statements there. And one of the things that I think I want to kind of just jump in on real quick that I feel like I have a kind of interesting perspective on is the spirituality part of it. And I mean, I grew up Christian. I was raised in church. It's not that anything there, but what I want to say here is that spirituality doesn't necessarily have to be like your belief in a greater being, I guess you could say. And I'm not trying to say that I don't or anything like that, but what I am trying to say is that, like, for me, um, bouncing off the last point that you just made, like when those of us that have been through it know, but when you are in, I mean, your darkest moment per
Mhm.
se, like when you have lost the most, that is when you are able to look the deepest
Mhm.
internally and find out what you truly want. And I can vouch for that. I will tell you that. But what I'm also saying is that in those moments, I was able to develop a belief that I was going to manifest that vision for myself.
Mhm.
And that is where I find my spirituality, if you will, in my belief that I'm going to do what it takes to achieve the vision that I have for my future, for my family, etc. That is wherein my spiritual belief I feel comes from. And that's why I said I feel like it's a little bit interesting that I've found my power in that belief for myself. Not necessarily that I don't, what I mean, have spirituality,
Yeah.
religion otherwise, but what I'm saying is that I've found confidence in that belief on my own. So, like, for those of us out there that aren't necessarily deeply religious or anything like that, I'm just trying to say that you don't necessarily, like, to me, I'm no expert here. I'm not saying you have to do it like I'm doing it, but like to me, I don't feel that you personally have to have that belief in a specific religion in order to have that spiritual connection with yourself.
Mhm.
And like
Mhm.
that's what I kind of wanted to point out
Yeah.
there. But
I agree
yes, like
with
I
you.
said, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I agree with you, and I'm glad you said it because most people don't see that yet. Um, but I agree with you 100%. In fact, I think nearly every person is, again, and nothing against Christianity or Buddhism or anything, but every person at some point should wipe the canvas clean of everything they've been told is true, everything, and just start, because at 5 years of age, we're not, we can't wipe it clean and begin, you know. Um, but as we grow older, I just think it's something a person can do and see what you find, as you did, when you do that, and you will find something. And even if it's just, as you said, it doesn't have to be a belief in a higher power, but if you could ask yourself, do am I willing to believe in a higher power? And if you are, what does it look like? What does it feel like to you? Not what we've been told, and again, there's not that there's anything wrong with Christianity. I mean, the Jesus to me would have been a very high calibrating spiritual being, human being, and so would Lord Buddha, and so would, in fact, Jesus wasn't a Christian because Christianity came after him. Like, he was just a spiritual person, right? And that Sermon on the Mount, I mean, the spiritual teachings there are universal. But again, it's great to do what you've done, which is to look down deep within, and whatever is there for you will work. I mean, but again, and you're talking about exactly what we've been talking about as well, which is sort of it's almost like throw everything out of the house and start fresh and see what you have. And this time you're doing it for yourself and what works for you. And as we said, who do you want to be? What type of person do you want to be? And if once you figure that out, then the path is there. And once you get started, it'll all just fall into place, because you have a plan, you have an inner sort of a purpose for yourself, as opposed to you have a contract or a map that was given to you that you're told is going to work, and it doesn't work for everybody. It just doesn't.
100%. And I really love the way that you wrapped that up there. So I'm not even going to try to do it better. I like the way you did it, so I'm going to leave it alone. But
We could go on and on here, Aaron. Here for
absolutely. But we're going to go ahead and wind it down here. In closing, the question that I always like to ask the guests is, if you could go back and have a conversation with yourself in that personal ground zero moment, what do you think that you would tell yourself in that conversation?
Ooh, it's a good one. I'd say question everything. Question everything. Flesh it out. And don't be scared to, like me and you having a conversation here, if you said something that I didn't understand or was confused about it, I have no problem saying, what do you mean by that, Aaron? And can you tell me more about that and explain? And, questioning everything doesn't have to be done in a rebellious sort of, I know better sort of a way. I don't mean it like that. I mean, out of curiosity, question everything. If it doesn't make sense, or if you can't pick it up in your heart or your head, ask somebody to explain it, and then you get it. Because suppose we've just been conditioned to believe what we know is what we know, and it's true. I heard somebody say one time, and it's very interesting why in a way we don't question it, and we're left with all these beliefs and stuff, is when you're a kid you get a lot of good advice and tips from your parents and from your culture. Like, you live by the ocean and there's a cliff, the parents say, look, don't go near that cliff because you might fall over and you'll be, that's true, and it's very good advice. The same day they might tell you something about some religion or something that might not be true, but you'll take it all in together as well. These people have my best interests at heart, so I'm not going to question it. But I think everybody should question everything at some point and find out what works for them.
Love that point. I mean, and I don't want to go on another deep tangent here because I know we're winding it down here. But just I think it's so important that so many of us, like especially like the younger generations now, don't realize is that we are afraid to do that. And what I mean is, like, literally it comes down to something as simple as we are afraid to ask questions in the classroom because we're afraid to be wrong.
Mm.
And I can tell you, I've been that person. I still am sometimes. I get anxious. I don't want to answer questions in front of people and be wrong. I don't
Yeah.
want to be that one that doesn't seem to understand. Nobody does. But what we're saying is that there's power in that, and that there's nothing wrong with questioning things out of curiosity, like you said. Like, it's not to defile somebody else's belief. It's not to prove somebody else wrong. It's just purely to understand yourself, to understand a concept, to understand whatever it is you want.
Yeah.
And that's where I just think that I love the point that you made, because like so many of us now, I mean, I'm hoping we'll realize now that I've even pointed it out, like we simply are afraid to ask questions. And a lot of us are missing out on a lot of opportunity there because we're not looking deeper. And I feel like that has been kind of the overarching theme of today's episode, but I think it's just so important. So those of you tuned in right now, take some time. I mean, it's not easy and it is uncomfortable, but look deeper, do what you can. I mean, get a clean sheet of paper and just, write down what you want out of your life. And actually take the time to think about it. And then, break some things down, the skills that you have, little things that you could do to, work your way towards that goal. And shoot, you need some help, email me. We'll put it together, man. So with that, everybody, thanks so much again, Lou. This has been an awesome episode, completely value packed. And I hope that everybody listening in today gets something out of it. With that, everyone, always remember, this is Dream Chasers Ground Zero, and there's nowhere to go from here but up. Thanks, guys.